Members of the public, I've no doubt that you're all going to respect each other's opinion and behave nicely, so that would be jolly good. Thank you. So to move on to the main items of business, I'd first like to introduce the officers in front and from left to right. We have Lewis Jones, our planning lawyer. Next to him is Gemma Patterson, Principal Planning Officer. Here we have Flo Taylor, Principal Planning Officer, Louise Yandel, Area Team Leader, and Beth Howland-Smith, Development Control Manager. Now, the minutes of our last meeting have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Do I have your permission to sign them as a true record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Emma, any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies for absence from Councillors Val Henry, John Gray, John Ward and Brian Adams.
Any substitutes?
None.
Okay. Any declarations of interest?
We've had one before the meeting from Councillor Mike Band. He has a non-pecuniary interest in respect of agenda item 7, as he's Waverley Borough Council's representative on the Surrey Hills AONB board.
Okay, thank you. Any questions by members of the public or from members?
None.
Performance against government targets. Beth, are you introducing that? That's not on the agenda. Okay, thank you. So we move on to the applications for consideration this evening, and the first one is item A1, planning reference WA/2018/0275, land at Sturt Farm, Sturt Road, Hazelmere, GU 27 3SE, and I would invite Flo Taylor to introduce this application. Thank you, Flo.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start, two update sheets, only some minor changes, just a couple of amendments to the report, one in terms of site area, just making it correct, and just removing one of the constraints that was listed in the report. Just highlighting, we have had an additional comment from the applicant in response to our council's tree officer's observation, and they have stated that their tree protection plans do accord with the British standard, and also the 2-bedroom flat over garages are compliant with the space standard requirements. Officers have measured these, and we do think they are slightly under. There may be some measuring differentials there. Condition 1 amended, but under update sheet 2, I further amended it just to add some plans of the play space to add clarity. So that's been superseded by update sheet 2. And then other minor amendments to conditions 3, 4, and 8 and 13 just to add clarity. And on update sheet 2, just to clarify, we had an additional response from Natural England in respect of the SANG that wasn't in the officer report, where they raised no objection to the reserve matters. Just before I go into lots of details, starting with the background, the application before members tonight is a reserve matters application for scale, layout and appearance following the grant of outline permission for the site for up to 135 dwellings under WA 2014-1054 and a subsequent Section 73 application WA 2017-1346. These permissions establish the principle for up to 135 dwellings on the site. As part of the outline permission, access and landscaping details were agreed, as well as details in respect of drainage and SANG, subject to conditions, and therefore these are not matters before the committee for consideration tonight. Members should note that should the reserve matters be approved, such an approval is not a planning permission in its own right and would need to be read in conjunction with the outline permission and Section 106 agreement. Additionally, conditions imposed on the outline permission would remain in force and therefore would not be repeated. Looking at the location plan on the screen, the site is outlined in red. It's located 800 metres to the south of Hazelmere Centre and to the east of Sturt Road. The site comprises an area of open countryside To the west, so in this blue area down here, is a cluster of buildings which are Grade 2 listed, and Sturt Farm, which is a building of local merit. To the north are the properties on Sunbrow, along here, which are the other nearest neighbours. The aerial photograph, this shows the open space which forms the site and the area to the south of it, an existing built form to the other sides. These site photos should give you an indication of the site, its surroundings and the topography. As can be seen, the site slopes up from west to east, with the top image taken from near the south of the site and the bottom image from the northeast looking down. In the background, in both of these images, you can see the adjacent properties on Sunbrow. In these images, the shallow valley along the site is more clear, with the height of the land dropping from the properties on Sunbrow to the rear. The current proposal has made use of the topography to locate the higher buildings mainly within the valley. This image shows the northeast of the site and the land level change in this location. Open space and the leap and lap would be located at this end of the site. Looking at the proposed site layout plan, to a large degree the layout on the site was established through the approval of the landscaping proposals as part of the outline permission, and also through the constraints of the site. As can be seen, the layout is based around a central spine road with short cul-de-sacs leading off to the north and linear residential development to the southeast. Officers consider that there would be sufficient separation such that the proposal would not result in material harm to neighbouring occupiers, and conditions are proposed to further ensure this. Parking spaces are in excess of the council's requirement, which would include 14 garages, frontage parking, parking courts and visitor spaces. Some of the parking would be in parking areas accessed via the flat over garages, which would help to screen the parking. A leap and lap would be located to the northeast, and officers are satisfied with the details proposed. This plan shows the affordable housing layout, and the affordable housing would be spread across the site in small groups. On this plan, blue would be the shared ownership houses and orange would be the affordable rented houses. Officers consider that the affordable housing would be well distributed, given the 40% affordable housing provision has resulted in a large number of affordable units. Thinking about the scale, this plan shows the distribution of yellow 2-storey buildings and orange 2.5-storey buildings. The higher buildings would be located along the central spine road, away from existing occupiers and making use of the topography of the site. The proposal includes a mix of 2 and 2.5-storey dwellings and 2.5-storey apartment blocks shown on the right here. The apartment blocks have been designed with a barn style to reflect the buildings at Sturt Farm, and would be partially timber-clad and part-hanging tiles, with the orientation and arrangement of this varying across the site. There would be a mix of dwelling sizes broadly in line with the indicative requirements of the SHMA, and an improvement in this regard since the outline application. This slide shows a further selection of the range of dwelling types proposed. Interest would be added from differences in window style, brick detailing, materials, dormer design and windows. Houses would be predominantly detached and semi-detached to reflect local form, and the development would be tenure blind. This slide shows the 4 base pallet types. Got brick and tile hanging with red plain tile roof on top left, oak stain cladding and red tile roof top right, red brick with brick detailing and red plain tile bottom left, and red multi-stock brick and grey slate roof bottom right. This image shows how the different materials would be spread across the site. The maximum material usage in a row would be for 4 dwellings, with interest added from the distribution of materials and dwelling types. The next few slides show some 3D visuals and street scene images which help to further illustrate the proposed scale, appearance and layout, and how variety and interest would be achieved across the site, and how the proposals relate to topography. As part of this application, the applicants have also submitted additional information to discharge the requirements of the surface water drainage, foul water drainage and drainage strategy conditions from the outline application, and to discharge some specific Section 106 legal agreement requirements in respect of affordable housing, SANG, play space and open space. Officers have had comments from the appropriate consultees and are satisfied that these additional details can be agreed, which relates to recommendation B. Turning to the determining issues, the principle of the proposed quantum of housing was established through the grant of outline permission for up to 135 dwellings on the site. This is a subsequent reserved matters application with layout, appearance and scale being the only matters for consideration this evening. In terms of technical matters, whilst the built form would result in less than substantial harm to the adjacent listed buildings at the Sturt farm end of the site, this would be no greater than that accepted in determination of the outline and Section 73 applications. Whilst concerns have been raised in the agenda report in respect of trees and landscaping, and the applicant has subsequently disputed the comment in the officer report in respect of the sourcing availability of some proposed species, this was an outline matter and the details are subject to a condition on the outline application. This condition requires submission and agreement of landscaping details to the local planning authority, and this matter is not for agreement as part of the current reserved matters application. Notwithstanding, officers are satisfied that an acceptable scheme in this regard could be achieved in due course as part of the discharge of condition process. The County Highway Authority has recommended conditions to make the development acceptable in highways terms, and the proposed parking provision would be acceptable. As mentioned in respect of recommendation B, the SANG and drainage details are considered acceptable by the statutory consultees and are not matters to be considered when assessing the reserved matters. Turning to the matters of judgment, in respect of the countryside beyond the greenbelt and landscape character, officers are satisfied that the current proposal would not result in any additional harm over that impact already established in the outline application, and which the benefits of the proposals were considered to outweigh. I've already mentioned that housing mix would be acceptable and that there would be 40% affordable housing of a mix matching that agreed within the outline Section 106 agreement. Other matters of judgment are design and visual amenity and impact on residential amenity, standard of accommodation and amenity space, all of which officers consider to be acceptable. Turning to the recommendation A, as set out on update sheet 2, this would be that the reserved matters of layout, scale and appearance be approved, subject to conditions 2, 5 to 7, 9 to 12 and 14, as set out on pages 52 to 58 of the agenda report. Amended condition 1 as per the second update sheet. Amended conditions 3, 4, 8 and 13 as set out on the first update sheet, and informatives 1 to 9 as set out on pages 58 to 60 of the agenda report. Recommendation B remains as set out on page 60 of the agenda report, that details in respect of conditions 7, 8 and 10 of WA 2017-1346 be agreed, and affordable housing, SANG, play area and open space details required by specific clauses in the Section 106 agreement be agreed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Flo. Very detailed report there. Thank you. This application is subject to public speaking, and I would first like to invite Robert Lane to speak on behalf of the objectors. Good evening, Mr. Lane. I understand the procedure has been explained to you. You have 4 minutes from the point where you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. With Waverley Borough Council having granted outline planning permission, residents of Sunbrow, immediately to the north of Sturt Farm, were given to believe that certain provisions would be honoured to make this development more palatable. However, I would draw attention to the fact that the latest plans do not follow through on certain provisions of the applicant's own environmental statement. The latest application includes elements that do not adhere to some provisions of Waverley's local plan and the Hazelmere design statement. Environmental issues. Submitted under the applicant's outline planning application, his environmental statement commits to structural planting to reduce the potential visual impacts of residential units, with the specific commitment to planting not less than 5 metres in depth along the northern boundary. However, contrary to this provision, the applicant now proposes infringing on this boundary zone with housing, gardens, car parking, etc. In doing so, the applicant is clearly not committing to adhering to the provisions of his own environmental statement, let alone the provisions of Waverley's local plan and the Hazelmere design statement. Given these local policy documents, it also begs the question as to why an entire 430-metre length of hedgerow adjacent to the southern boundary was torn down in 2017, and only last month the largest and most prominent oak tree on Sturt Farm was felled, a tree that had flourished for some 170 years. Balkan massing. The environmental statement also states that 2.5-storey units, which I personally consider more to be 3-storey units, will be restricted to the central core areas, and also defines an exclusion zone of 17 metres to reduce the potential visual impacts of these taller houses along the northern boundary. Also, Waverley's local plan states that any new development should not significantly harm the amenities of occupiers of neighbouring properties by way of overlooking, overbearing appearance or other adverse environmental impacts, and the Hazelmere design statement defines similarly. Furthermore, Bidwell's Sturt Farm Planning and Community Involvement Statement states that the massing of the buildings on the northern boundaries step down to 2-storey houses or garages where they align with the rear gardens of properties on Sun Brow. This document also commits to respect neighbouring dwellings and provide only flank elevations facing the boundaries. A statement that is clearly not true with regard to plot 38 and 39, where it is proposed to build a 3-storey structure, a property which infringes the applicant's promised 5-metre site boundary zone, infringes the applicant's promised 17-metre exclusion zone, and is near perfectly aligned and facing 45 Sun Brow, which will clearly affect the privacy of all these households. With the plans also proposing to construct a number of houses well within the falling distance of at least 3 tall trees on this site, one has to question the merit of building in such close proximity to these trees. It certainly begs the question as to whether houses constructed under these veteran oaks will be able to withstand the impact of a falling tree should the worst happen. Time prevents me from covering other concerns, such as the significant risk of local potable water contamination associated with the aquifer on this site and stormwater flood management. In particular, the maintenance of attenuation tanks, given the frequently seen problems of local sand causing stormwater drains blockages in the area. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Now invite Andrew Stainsby to speak in support of the application. Good evening, Mr. Stainsby. Once again, you have 4 minutes from the point at which you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. This reserved matters application flows from the existing outline consent for 135 homes at Sturt Farm, alongside the new detailed access plan and change of use to Sang. It is a result of public consultations, engagement with stakeholders, and 4 years close liaison with officers. Throughout the process, we have always responded positively to questions and concerns raised by members. The layout is linear in nature, respecting the site topography. It provides 132 new dwellings, all of which have been designed to national space standards or better. As locals, our approach has been to reflect the vernacular style and palette of materials typical of the immediate area. The layout of roads and footpaths has been approved by County Highways. Parking, cycle storage and recycling all comply with the Council's latest requirements, as do electric charging points, 100% compliance. Care has been taken to respect our neighbours' amenity. None of the dwellings closest to the boundary directly face existing properties. Your officers have ensured that no overlooking occurs from flank walls. The existing public footpath is upgraded to accommodate cycles and provide a direct link between the town centre, station, Camelsdale and the Surrey Cycle network. A sustainable drainage scheme is fully integrated into the layout. This both attenuates the flow of surface water, alleviating any off-site risk to existing residents, and protects the underlying aquifer. Details of the design and maintenance have been approved by Thames Water and the Environment Agency. The development looks to provide a green legacy. Nearly half of the land is dedicated to landscaping as per the outline consent. 148 large-sized trees will be planted amongst the homes. 1,000 oak saplings and a further 3,000 native shrubs and trees will be added to the existing boundaries, creating a strong framework and a new community woodland. 2 new purpose-designed children's play areas are also provided for residents and locals to enjoy. In addition to the scheme, it delivers 3.5 hectares and on-site sang. This land is effectively a new park, maintained in perpetuity at no cost to Waverley. Most importantly, the scheme delivers the 40% affordable housing as promised to members at outline stage. This is a third more than the Council's general requirement and is in striking contrast to other large schemes in the area that have failed to provide any affordable homes at all. The 53 affordable homes are spread out across the site, indistinguishable in terms of size and appearance from the adjoining open market dwellings. The mix of tenure is fully compliant with the Council's requirements. These new affordable homes will help reduce Waverley's housing waiting list, which we know is a concern to members. The scheme delivers financial contributions of over 1.2 million, as agreed with Waverley and the county, to help fund leisure facilities, recycling, road improvements and local schools. We believe the scheme delivers on all of the elements in the outline consent, particularly affordable housing, whilst providing generously landscaped public open spaces for generations to come. We ask the members to support the officer's recommendations for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Goodridge.
Chairman, I wonder if it would be helpful for officers to comment upon the objector's remarks, particularly concerning, I think, overlooking on, I think it was 45 Sunrise, and any other comments that could assist us relating to the objector's comments.
Thank you. Yes, officers.
Thank you, Chairman. So the properties in question that I think the objector was referring to are these ones here. As you can see, the properties closest to the boundaries have all got their side flank elevations closest to the properties on Sunbrow, with the exception of these 2 here. However, as you can see, they are set quite significantly away from the boundary, and they meet our guidance in terms of separation distances from the rear wall to the rear wall on Sunbrow, and also in terms of the rear wall to the boundary itself. So those are the properties that were in question there. And in relation to his other comments in relation to landscaping, officers are satisfied that the reserve matter scheme is in accordance with the landscaping and environmental statement that was agreed at outline stage. There has been some hedgerow removal, and an oak tree has been felled on the site. The tree in question was not a protected tree. They were free to remove it without permission from the local planning authority, and there are a huge number of trees being secured as part of the landscaping scheme, which was secured by condition on the outline permission to secure replacement planting along the southern boundary to create a very strong buffer with the countryside beyond it, and also in this area of the site here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Goodridge said most of what I was going to say there, but just to comment quickly, are those trees that are on that boundary line approaching Sunbrow, I think it was, are those there now, or are those the new plantings that are going to be there? is my first point. And secondly, just it's actually really good to see that we've got more affordable housing than we need, and actually that it's been retained from the previous application to this one, which is obviously something that I can't say later.
Thank you. Louise?
Thank you, Chairman. So the detailed landscaping scheme will be secured by condition. That was a condition on the outline scheme, and that will include new planting along that boundary with Sunbrow to really make it a stronger landscaped buffer.
So just out of interest, that screening that's there, how long will that take to grow to be appropriate screening, just in general terms?
So when we are satisfied that the separation distances between the buildings are sufficient without landscaping in terms of sort of residential amenity, the landscaping that is being secured along there is really to try and preserve some of the countryside characteristics of the site. And we will get a mixture of planting along that boundary, of significant size so that it secures some screening from the occupation of those dwellings.
You're confident that 45 Sunbrow can't be seen into from that 3-storey site, despite the fact that there's the correct amount of gap. It's fine, is it? For sure.
You won't see into from the windows. You won't be able to see. The separation distance, which is set out in our supplementary planning document, is a 21-metre window-to-window separation, which exceeds it. As you'll probably be aware, if you're stood in a window directly looking into another window, you will be able to make out things in that window, but it is generally considered to be an acceptable separation distance. But you would be able to, see some things. Just to clarify that the distance is 41 metres, so it's well in excess of the 21 metres we usually try to secure. Thank you.
Sorry, that was 41 metres, so that's 20 metres more than we would expect. Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. It is very gratifying to see the proportion of affordable housing here. Very gratifying indeed. 135 dwellings. I did read 272 parking spaces. Did that include the 8 or so garages? Or it does. So if there were 2 vehicles associated with each dwelling, that would leave 2 parking spaces spare. Obviously, these people are not going to have too many friends coming around because they won't be able to park anywhere. That's just an observation. And in terms of the top right, excuse me, of our plan there, we have the green just to the left, the green distorted roundabout. And I noticed that the 4 turning corners are extremely tight, and I have concerns about the possibility of long wheelbase vans, the DPD, the UPS vehicles being able to turn around there without mounting that green space. We have a problem in Milford, for example, in Amberley Road, where the green roundabout has been seriously disturbed, become very rutted, a metre or a metre and a half in. The grass has been completely eroded away, and this is because vans of that nature have been asked to sort of turn round, but of course there's on-street car parking because there isn't enough space. So I just sort of raised that and would hope that our developer will take those sort of observations on board and try to ensure we have a practical, fit-for-purpose passageway for vehicles. Now, there's just one other thing, if I may. Our speaker in favour, or on behalf of the applicant, specifically mentioned that electric charging points were to be provided according to the regulations. Now, I find that a little bit, I don't understand why that should be so emphasised when we have put in here a condition 8, which says about what sort of density of electric charge. It's as though there's not a tie-up between ourselves because we feel we've got to impose a condition, and yet the applicant has said, I'm going to provide them anyway.
Officers, did you wish to comment? I do note on page 42 of the report that a swept path analysis plan has been submitted and approved for the towing of refuse vehicles. So if they can get round, hopefully most of us can.
I understand, Chairman. I have my doubts about swept path analysis and how much the future it takes into account. And indeed, the fact that so often we've seen that unless that precise line is taken by a vehicle, then it's not going to get round in the declared way. Thank you.
Flo, did you wish to respond to anything there? No?
I was just going to clarify in terms of the parking. To accord with our guidance, there would need to be 266 parking spaces provided, and that would include amount for visitor parking. So actually they're providing in excess of that requirement. And in terms of, sort of the roundabout at the top, I just had a quick measure, and it looks like the pathway is about 4.5 metres to 5 metres wide. So there should be room for vehicles to get around there.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've got no problem with building new houses, which we have to do it. The biggest concern is those people who are going to be left without a beautiful view of the countryside. So it's Sunbrow and my concerns. And we've talked a lot about the buffer zone at the top. Well, of course, and the planting. Can you tell me, is the planting going to be in the side and rear gardens of the new properties, or is there a sort of 3-metre buffer zone that is planted up and is managed by everything? Because I can assure you, in the previous council I was in, every time there was a buffer zone all the way around the ones in Petersfield and Liphook and Alton, which was within a management company, gradually they were all bought out by the owners of the properties, and they could do whatever they liked on their boundaries. So if the new buffer zone is going to be within the applicant's site now and not within the Sunbrow people's future maintenance, then it's absolutely irrelevant, because anybody can do with it, unless it's all TPO'd, you can do what you like with it. Thank you.
Just to clarify, you perhaps can't see very clearly on this plan, but if you go into the zoomed in plan, the boundaries of the gardens are separated by the buffer from the site boundary. So there is a separation.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I just wondered whether or not officers could confirm what the finished roof height is for the 2.5, 3-storey buildings, please. Can I just ask another question while you're searching for that, so that I don't,
you know, sorry,
we'd have it to hand.
Pile of papers there.
Can we go to the slide where it showed the elevation of the land with the buildings on it? Because I noticed within the report it states about the higher parts of the site on the eastern end would be visible. And I just wondered if you could confirm which part of that drawing on the proposed street scenes would refer to the eastern end of the site. My concern is that the blocks of flats will be dominant on the skyline.
Okay, so if you look at the bottom street scene elevation, the area, the green roundabout that Councillor Lee referred to earlier is here. So this property that you can see here is plot number 121, and that is right at the eastern end of the site, adjacent to the leap and lap. And these are detached these are all detached properties that are located around the green sort of roundabout area at the top. Does that answer your query?
Well, okay, so the looking at the site from the pictures, the photographs, it looked like it went up from the western end and started an incline up to the east on the actual photographs of the site, but that may have been slightly misleading. But my just concern is, if you go back to the site plan then, which shows the actual buildings themselves, so that's it there. So can you point out in the eastern end of the site, the 3-storey blocks of flats? Can you just point them out?
There is a plan that's coloured up to show which is...
That one there.
That'll do.
So the orange buildings are the 2.5-storey. So what I just showed you was the street scene looking at these ones here. The buildings that are 3 storeys are more located in the central part of the site here and down at the bottom end along the Spine Road.
And so the height of those 2.5-storey, we're still looking for that. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. There's a huge pile of plans. If you can bear with us for a minute.
I'll just one other thing is that the pre-commencement condition as well for the Badger survey. Could officers just confirm about the pre-commencement conditions from the point of view of, I know we were talking about it the other week and agreeing that if we have pre-commencement conditions, they have to be agreed by the developer or something. Can we just confirm the status of the Badger? Thank you.
Yes, so for all the pre-commencement conditions, the developer has seen all of those and has agreed to all of them. So all the pre-commencement conditions have got agreement.
Councillor Byam, while the flow is still looking and measuring.
Yes. Thank you. We see a climb from west to east in terms of the topography. My memory of being on the site visit, that there was a decline north to south, slight decline, so that those two taller buildings, if indeed they are taller, actually dip down very slightly. Am I correct, or is it my just false memory of that particular site visit?
Yeah, so effectively where the centre of the Spine Road is, it dips down from north to south and then rises slightly again on this side. Yeah, so in the top photo you can kind of see the incline here towards the properties on Sunbrow, dipping down and then rising again towards where that strong landscape buffer would be.
Yeah,
have we got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've measured one of the affordable units. These ones, I don't even know if these are affordable ones or. Plots 24 to 32. I don't. They are pretty much the same across all of them. These are measuring a total height of 11.7 metres maximum.
Okay, anybody else like to comment? Councillor Goodridge and then Councillor Isham.
Chairman, not wishing to be too pedantic, but just on an accuracy, on the revised recommendation, it talks about informatives set out on pages 58 to 60. All the informatives are on my agenda anyway, 58 to 59. There's no informatives on page 60.
You're quite right, it's recommendation B on page 60, isn't it?
Well, it's A and B, I think. Oh, it's recommendation A.
In the report, it's, yeah. So the informative is on 58 and 59. Right. Sherwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've been involved with this particular area since 2008 when the owner of the land, Mr. Lawson, offered it to the council for various things. 2011 we came to the first of the Sturt Farm proposals. A long time and we've almost had yearly site visits, so I know the site very well. What we're actually looking at here is the appearance, the layout, and the scale. I find the appearance a whole lot more agreeable than many of the applications we've seen before us. There's individual detailing, as explained by the officers. It really is quite different to many of the ones that we've seen. The layout and scale have changed quite dramatically, because I think originally, going back to 2011, there was something like 165 homes. It came down to 155, 135, and now we're looking at 132, of which 40% are affordable homes. And looking at it, the appearance, you can't tell whether they're affordable, rented, shared ownership, or what. I think this is an ideal scheme from that point of view. We're looking at a sang right next door that is guaranteed to be there in perpetuity. We've seen Thames Water and the Environmental Agency, who are not pushovers, agree that this scheme should go ahead. We know the aquifer is there, but Thames are convinced that this scheme has got all the right protections. Therefore, looking forward to seeing 40% affordable homes on this side of 132 dwellings, I think the developers have really worked hard to produce something that's worthwhile for Hazelmere. And as a local member, I will be certainly supporting it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, if you look at that view which is on the screen now, obviously it's going to have a great impact on the residents of Sunbrow, where once they looked over fields and woods, now they're going to be looking over housing. But the fact remains that we have an outline consent for this site, and I think it's very encouraging to see for once that a developer has actually listened to, or I hope has been listening to JPC meetings over the last 3 or 4 years, where we've banged on about certain things that we don't like and certain things we do like, and I think it appears to me that they've tried very hard to incorporate the things that we don't like and exclude the things, incorporate the things we do like and exclude the things that we don't like. There's an over-provision of affordable housing, there's an over-provision of parking, we've got the charging points, we've got the affordable housing scattered throughout the site, just what we like to see. The large parking bays have been avoided, and I think, unless I hear anything in these last few minutes to change my mind, I will be supporting this application. Thank you. Would any member like Councillor Hyman?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can see that over the years a lot of effort has gone into making this acceptable. I think that the residents still have a lot of concerns. It's AONB. Certainly one of the issues should be that the problem of the aquifer is solved by having no infiltration drainage. So that means there's nothing soaking into the ground. It's going off into down the drains. 40% affordable, very attractive to it, but we are being asked, and you know what my concern is, we are being asked to effectively sign off the mitigation scheme for the Wealden Heaths here. And as most members will know, tomorrow night we have got adjustments to our policy on the agenda. We've got to look at the Sweetman judgment itself, and the Sweetman judgment states at paragraph 38, and it's the important bit, it says that the assessment carried out, which we have to have, and which we're told we have, may not have lacunae, no gaps, and must contain complete, precise and definitive findings and conclusions capable of removing all reasonable scientific doubt as to the effect of the proposed works on the SBA. And protective features. So my question simply has to be that can officers please confirm that such an assessment exists, that we have got evidence that SANGs or the extent to which SANGs are effective, and where we might find that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will be aware, a number of the principles of the development of this site were approved at outline stage, and that did include the impact of the proposal on the Wealden Heaths special protection area. That was approved. That is an extant outline permission. As part of this reserve matters, we are just looking at those detailed reserve matters in relation to layout, appearance and scale, and that does not include the impact on the SPA, which has already been considered. In any event, as part of that outline permission, there was a SANG secured to mitigate for the proposal on the SPA, and as such, this proposal has already mitigated its effect. You will be aware from recommendation B that there are a couple of sort of detailed documents that the applicants are seeking to approve as part of this reserve matters scheme. Those are the SANG delivery plan and the SANG management plan. Natural England and officers have looked at both of those, and we are satisfied that they meet the requirements of the Section 106 in that respect. And going forward, there are a number of other requirements of the Section 106 in terms of the actual details of that SANG coming forward that we would expect to be submitted to us between now and the commencement of works or other points as required by the legal agreement. But members can be assured that the principle has been established, the impact of the proposal on the SPA has been mitigated for, and that Section 106 will secure the detail that is required to ensure that mitigation is sufficient. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Follows, did you wish to come back? No, you didn't. Okay. Councillor Hyman?
I'd like an answer to the question, if possible, please. Can you confirm that that such an assessment, the assessment that is required under paragraph 38 or described as a Sweetman judgment, because that is what we have to go by, it's no good us turning around and saying, well, we did this before the law was clarified and therefore we've got away with it, because that's not the case. The catch-all principle applies. We need to know tonight that that assessment exists. So I'd like just a simple answer to the question, where is that assessment, please? If it exists, it must have precise and definitive findings and conclusions, and that has to show us that SANGs are effective, I'm quite sure.
Thank you,
The
Louise.
extent to which they are. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. An appropriate assessment hasn't been carried out for this site, this scheme, sorry. This is because the outline permission preceded the Sweetman judgment, and as members will be aware from all of their planning decisions, that all applications are determined on their own merits in relation to the relevant case law at the time of that application. The Sweetman judgment didn't exist, so no appropriate assessment has been carried out. However, you can be assured that if an appropriate assessment was carried out, that mitigation is there, but it is not necessary for you to revisit that principle that has already been established. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. It's always interesting to hear the local members' views and support, so that's been very useful tonight. And I think my question has probably been just answered then. My original question was, tomorrow's night's meeting, would the slight change in the wording would still be in the correct position to be in? But I think you've answered that question by saying it was prior to Sweetman judgment, so I think you've answered it.
Councillor Hyman, was there another point you wish to make, rather than go over the same ground, please?
Only that a year and a half ago at JPC, when I queried whether, and it was to do with development in Badshot Lee actually, and I queried our lawyer's position, and he confirmed that the catch-all principle does apply. If we don't have an appropriate assessment this evening at the reserve matters stage, and we don't have the information we need in accordance with the judgment, we can't lawfully grant consent. It's pretty plain. But I don't expect the officers to admit to that now, because it's a big deal. But I will be voting against this on those grounds in that case. If there's no appropriate assessment, Chairman, I have no choice.
Thank you. So moving on to the... Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back?
Can I just ask a couple of very quick questions? Can you confirm about the pavements? Are there pavements throughout the site? We've not got loads of shared surfaces everywhere? Along the main spine road, is that a pavement I spy?
There are paved modes throughout the site, and it's designed to be pedestrian friendly.
Thank you. And one very other one about bins. The bin storage, there was something about the bin storage for the flats being under the garage or something. Could you just explain that a little bit further, please? Thank you.
There are for the apartment blocks, the bin storage is within the units, the flat over garage units, which is your top left here. On some of them, you've got garages, and some of them you've got bin stores for the apartment blocks. So top left is, sorry, I was pointing at my finger, not the mouse.
So that's not their bin storage, that is bin storage for the flats underneath the 2-bedroom affordable flat over garages.
But it would then, or they're also not necessarily affordable flats over the garage. I think there are some market ones as well. Yeah. I think it would be for those units as well, because they don't have private gardens. It would cover all of the ones that don't have private gardens. In the ones that have private gardens, their bin storage would be in their gardens. And they are located, these units are located here, between the apartment blocks. Again, I'm just trying to remember where they are. They're all sort of in close proximity, sort of adjacent to the apartment blocks. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which ones they are. I know in the report I said how many of them there were, and that they were sort of located adjacent to the apartment blocks and met those criteria.
Just to clarify, so the if we could go back to the picture of the 2-bedroom, the apartments over garage design. So that gap there, is that where the bin storage is, or it's under the veranda bit there?
The bin storage would be behind a door under where the balcony area is. The archway is to allow access to the parking behind it. So they're sort of carriage arches. Whereas it would be enclosed bin storage within the building. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it doesn't sound very pleasant. Thank you.
On that note, can we move on to the recommendation, please? So the revised recommendation, recommendation A, that the reserved matters of layout, scale and appearance be approved subject to conditions 2, 5 to 7, 9 to 12 and 14 as set out on pages 52 to 58 of the agenda report, amended condition 1 as per the second update sheet, amended conditions 3, 4, 8 and 13 as set out on the first update sheet, and informatives 1 to 9 as set out on pages 58 to 59 of the agenda report. Could I have all those in favour, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Those against?
1.
Abstentions?
2.
So that recommendation is approved. And then we move on to recommendation B, which remains as set out on page 60 of the agenda report, that details in respect of 7, 8 and 10 of application WA 2017 1346 be agreed, and affordable housing, sang, play area and open space details required by specific clauses in the section 106 agreement be agreed. All those in favour, please.
Okay, that's 17.
And against? Abstention?
1.
So that is also carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. I don't know if the people in the public gallery wish to go or not. So while we change seats. What are we on now, Gemma's? Okay. It's Go on. Oh, that's cleared the public gallery. So we move on to item B1, which is application reference WA/2018/1230, land at Green Lane Farm, Green Lane, Badshot Lee, GU9 9JL, as detailed on pages 61 to 104 of your report. And I'll invite Gemma to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. The site lies to the west of Green Lane at its southern junction with Badshot Lee Road. The site comprises an irregular shaped parcel of land enclosed by low-level hedgerows and sporadic trees. The site is surrounded by a rugby ground to the west, sewerage works to the southwest, a business park to the south, and dispersed residential development to the northeast. In February 2018, planning permission was allowed at appeal under WA 2016-2456 for the erection of 43 dwellings on the site, which included 18 affordable dwellings and associated parking and new access. It is highly material to the consideration of this current application that there is an existing permission that can be implemented on this site. It would therefore, at this point, be unreasonable under this current application to revisit the principle of the entire development. The current application seeks to amend conditions 2, 3, 5 and 8 of WA 2016-2456 in order to change the affordable housing provision, provide conservatories to plots 1, 3, 38, 40 and 43, and to alter plots 34 and 35 from a pair of semi-detached dwellings to a pair of two detached dwellings. For clarity, the proposal would reduce the affordable units on the site from 18 secured under WA 2016-2456 to 13. Plots 11, 12, 21, 22 and 35 would be amended from affordable housing to private housing. This amendment would not involve any external changes to the dwellings from that approved under WA 2016-2456. Turning to the external changes proposed under this current application, the house type approved under the previous planning application for plots 34 and 35 would be amended from the pair of semi-detached properties shown here into the two detached dwellings shown here. Members will note that the overall character of the amended dwellings would be retained. It is for this reason that officers considered the amendment to be minor in nature and would not significantly alter the previously approved layout. Other external changes proposed to this current application would be the addition of a single-storey rear conservatory to plots 1, 3, 38, 40 and 43. Officers also consider the addition of conservatory to these plots to be minor in nature and would not significantly alter the previously approved layout. Moving to the determining issues, officers consider that the matter of principle and technical opinion to be the principle of development, having regard to the appeal decision and that there is an existing permission which could be implemented on the site, impact on the SPA, having regard to Natural England being satisfied that the proposal would not affect the integrity of the SPA, subject to the relevant avoidance and mitigation measures being secured, which has been done under the Section 106 agreement completed under the previous planning application. Biodiversity, having regard to the submission of a reptile survey submitted under the appeal process, which satisfied both the council and the inspector that the proposal would not prejudice the ecological value of the site. And odour, having regard to the inspector's favourable conclusion of an odour assessment report submitted during the appeal process, which satisfied the inspector that Farnham sewage treatment works would not have an unacceptable impact on the living conditions of future occupiers of the proposed development. To the right of the slide, members are being asked to exercise their judgment in relation to the impact on the countryside beyond the greenbelt and the strategic gap. Having regard to the planning inspector's decision that the site does not make a material contribution to the landscape character of the area and only a minor contribution to the strategic gap as a result of it being cut off from the surrounding countryside by a surrounding urban context. Furthermore, the inspector concluded that the residential development on this site would retain a landscape frontage that would reduce its landscape impact and would be viewed in context with the immediate surrounding urban environment. Housing mix. Having regard to the mix being broadly in line with the requirements of the West Surrey Strategic Housing Market Assessment 2015, and affordable housing. Having regard to the conclusions of the planning inspector that the excess provision of affordable housing beyond the 30% sought under policy AHN1 of the local plan was not given any material weight in his decision, as he did not identify any conflicts with any of the relevant policies within the development plan. Impact on both visual amenity and residential amenity, noting the minor nature of the external amendments proposed that would not significantly alter the layout allowed under the previous planning application. And apologies, I see that Oda has appeared on the wrong part of the slide as well. If members would like to move to the update sheet, they will note that an amendment has been made to condition 1, which amends an unnecessary repetition in plan numbers. Officers also have an oral update to this application following receipt of a third-party objection this morning, which is the only objection to this application. I'm going to briefly give you a summary of those objections. The representation disagrees with officers' conclusion that the inspector did not attach any material weight to the affordable housing exceeding the requirements of both policy H5 of the local plan and policy AHN1 of the draft local plan, only that the inspector was silent on the matter and that he did not say affordable housing was not material. The third-party representation identifies paragraph 22 of the inspector's decision, which members can find on page 97 of the agenda, as supporting that conclusion. For ease, paragraph 22 of the officer report states as follows. Sorry, beg your pardon, of the inspector's decision states as follows. The Section 106 legal agreement would ensure the provision of 18 dwellings on the site to be affordable and provides a mechanism to determine the mix and provision of these dwellings. This exceeds the requirements of the policies on both the local and draft plan and the framework relating to the provision of affordable housing. As a result, the Section 106 legal agreement meets the requirements of Regulations 122 of the SIL regulations in relation to affordable housing. In response to the third-party concern, officers suggest that whilst the inspector agreed that the legal agreement met the requirements of SIL regulations, he also highlighted that the level of affordable of housing exceeded the requirements of the draft policy, which has now been adopted since the decision. The third-party representation also makes reference to inspector's conclusion that the Section 106 legal agreement is in significant weight of the proposal, which can be found at paragraph 25 on page 97 of the agenda. As the Section 106 agreement secured 43% affordable housing, the third-party representation concludes that significant weight was in fact given to the level of affordable housing proposed. In response to this, officers would reiterate the full context of paragraph 25, in which the inspector concludes, and I quote, "I conclude that the obligations contained within the Section 106 legal agreement would mitigate the effects of the proposed residential units on local facilities and services." As such, there would be in accordance with the regulations of the SIL. There would be in accordance with the SIL regulations. On this basis, the Section 106 legal agreement is of significant weight in favour of the proposal. And I end that quote. Officers are satisfied that from the full context of paragraph 25 that the inspector was giving significant weight to the financial contributions secured within the Section 106 agreement towards infrastructure improvements rather than the excessive level of affordable housing proposed. The third-party representation also suggests that the level of contributions expected would be affected by the level of affordable housing proposed. Officers can confirm that infrastructure contributions are based on housing size and numbers rather than tenure, and therefore the level of infrastructure contributions secured by the completed Section 106 legal agreement on the previous application are not affected by this amendment. Finally, the third-party representation makes reference to policy AHN1 of the local plan securing 30% affordable housing and not 40% as initially proposed as a result of enabling higher SIL contributions for non-housing SIL improvements, and that this level of SIL available is linked to the level of affordable housing. Officers' response to this is that the local plan requires 30% affordable housing on all development sites, and that SIL is not yet enforced. Moving on from that oral update, I'm afraid a final oral update relates to a further revision to Recommendation A and Recommendation B following receipt of some legal advice. So revised Recommendation A is that subject to the completion of a deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement to secure affordable housing and infrastructure contributions sought under WA 2016-2456, along with conditions 2 to 25 as set out in pages 79 to 89 of the agenda report, and amended condition 1, as set out in this update sheet, permission be granted. Revised recommendation B is that in conjunction with the reason 1 set out on pages 90 and 91 of the agenda report, that in the absence of a completed legal agreement, the proposal would fail to secure contributions towards education, leisure, recycling containers and highway works and, as such, would fail to mitigate the effects of the proposal upon infrastructure. It would therefore conflict with policies ICS1 and ST1 of the local plan, part 1, and policies FNP30 and FNP32 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan 2017. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gemma. I hope you've got those written down for me to read out later on. I think it's asking a bit much from members to try and remember that at the end of the discussion. Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the one of the two members for the ward in which this site exists. I would dearly love to be able to say, let's throw it out. We did throw it out. And of course it came back with, through appeal, never did understand quite the inspector's decision making, given the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, which seemed to have been ignored in parts of his argument. However, as Gemma has just said, I think it's very clear from the inspector's report that 18 houses, affordable houses, was in excess of our local plan policies, and he makes no mention of the harm to the countryside being alleviated by an excess number of affordable houses. And so with great reluctance I'm going to have to agree with the officer's recommendation. Before ceding to other speakers, I would like to draw attention to something which I find disturbing. And we are used at these planning committees to occasional developers coming in and threatening, in no lesser terms, the members of this committee with taking us to appeal and so on, and suggesting that we're going to waste council's money and so on. I would like to just read you an email which was sent to Elizabeth Sims from the developer. I won't read it all. Elizabeth, by the way...
Just a minute, Councillor. I think Lewis has an opinion on this as to whether...
You don't want me to say it?
I don't doubt that it's an issue that may need to be looked into, but I do question how relevant it is to the discussion and the planning application we're dealing with. I think it would be sensible to err on the side of caution in this case and deal with it offline, in my opinion.
I would just like to say in that case then, I won't quote any of this. However, I would say that I think the developer acted in a very unprofessional way in his dealings with the head of planning.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Mindful of what Councillor Story has said, I actually want to vote against this because I don't like it when they come back and reduce the number of affordable housing. I mean, we've seen this lots of times. They seem to be able to come back and amend their plans. We obviously have no recourse to do that. I'm noting the fact that Farnham Town Council also opposed it for the same reason. I'm also noting the fact that one of the things I think we're supposed to be here for is to obtain some sort of community benefit from these applications that come through. The 106 stays the same, the affordable housing is being reduced. If it were balanced out in another way or in any other way, I think I'd be more mindful to look at it. But I personally can't see why we should approve this, especially as Councillor Story has implied that the developer has been somewhat excessive in their dealings with the planning officers. So I was mindful to vote against it beforehand, and I'm going to continue to vote against it when we get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think it was actually said it was this developer that we were... that Councillor Story... Well, we won't know, will we? Because, no. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I mean, I have no inhibitions whatsoever, unlike Councillor Story, in saying that I don't think this should go through under a Section 73. I think quite frankly, this is a bending of the process, if you like. I accept that he has permission to build what he got permission to build with the inspector, and the inspector put on some conditions specifically on that. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what he has permission to build. Could we go back to where the location plan of this site? When we did the neighbourhood plan, we walked every inch of Farnham. I've already said this. I can show you bits of Farnham I didn't know existed. And when we were doing our built-up area boundary, we made it logical, so it followed natural boundaries. We didn't just think, ooh, we'll have a tweak here and a little round bit here. This looks like, when you now see our amended boundary, a little like a teapot spout, you know, sticking out from nowhere, because this piece of land doesn't relate to any other piece of land. And I'm with Councillor Story here in as much as how the inspector decided that this particular bit of land was suitable, I will never, ever understand. It's completely contrary to the wishes of the residents of Badshot Lee, the residents of Webburn, and in fact the residents of Farnham. It just does not sit naturally. Webburn and Badshot Lee have been superb. I can't praise them enough in the neighbourhood planning process, in being very active in offering sites, and the sites that we are developing finish off quite neatly the development and link up with the community facilities. This does nothing. The man has permission, and I can do nothing about that. He has permission, or she has, I have no idea who it is, has permission to build something, and the inspector put on strict conditions on that. This is a 73, and I can't see why he doesn't come in for a separate application. If he really wants to do something different from what he's got permission for, then I really think that's what he should do. I think these are material changes. I think they will change the nature of what he's got permission for. And I'm sorry, I cannot support this at all. I just think it's inappropriate, and I don't know how you work out what the inspector was thinking. We keep hearing your interpretation of what he was thinking and Councillor Story's interpretation. I've no idea what the man was thinking, or woman. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it bears absolutely has no logic in its thinking at all. And I think if the man wants to change anything on this site, he should come in for another full application, which we can have a look at. And by the way, it does stink.
Thank you. We're back to the odours, aren't we? Yeah. Are you talking about the site smelling or the process?
Oh, yes, I must make that clear. We had odour on both sides.
Yes, we did, yes.
And anybody who's had a child playing on the stinky pitch, which is just adjacent, will know just how much it stinks.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As much has been said by my fellow councillors, and being the second councillor with Councillor Story in that area, I totally support what Councillor Story has rejected, and I would like to reject it as well, because in detail, me and Story have spoken about it, Councillor Story, and we totally agree, and I support Councillor Carroll's as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see exactly how people are feeling locally, and I too was surprised with the result of the appeal, but that is what has happened. I've looked in detail going through the planning appeal decision, and I'm grateful that this was included with the papers so one could read all of it. And obviously the only controversial bit, you know, don't worry about conservatories or splitting one house into two. The affordable housing is the bit that has the emotional baggage with it. And one would like to try and preserve as much affordable housing that we've got in the bag as we could. But the judgment of the inspector does not say, for example, that this is an on-balance decision where the amount of the affordable houses just tips it in favour of me granting the appeal because of all the other things that I would turn it down for, he is in effect saying that, surprisingly, that in paragraph, for example, 26, that he hasn't identified any conflicts with relevant policies under the development plan or framework with this application, and therefore was going to grant it. And incidentally, it has 40% affordable housing, which is great, but didn't say that if there had been any less affordable housing, he wouldn't have granted it. And one can imply from that provided we comply with our own policy, if we get a fresh planning application rather than a Section 73 one, I think we'd be in big trouble to oppose it, because it complies totally with our local plan part 1 so far as affordable housing is concerned. The fact that we have an appeal decision takes away any realistic chance of refusing it for all the other grounds that we turned it down in committee previously. And I think we'd be on a hiding to nothing. And I don't say that with a great amount of satisfaction. I say that with a lot of regret, because I think looking at that plan, it's daft to put housing where the inspector has allowed it. But he has. We can't turn the clock back. And for that basis, I feel that I haven't got any planning reasons in my judgment, as I see it at the moment, to refuse this. And I would therefore, at the moment, go along with the officer's recommendations.
Thank you. I think your mention of planning reasons is the main point here, isn't it? That's where we've got to use our judgment as to whether we can, if we wish to refuse this application, whether we have sound planning reasons that will stand up under what will no doubt be another appeal. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid I think it is a material change to the planning application. I know that looking at planning reasons, I think that it needs a new planning application. I understand that planning application, there may be reasons why that perhaps would be approved, but it is a material change. I think a lot of the conversation is about second-guessing what the inspector would say or wouldn't have said. I think that really the inspector may have been silent on the subject because they probably were granting the appeal and thinking perhaps you know, that wouldn't be challenged on the affordable housing level because that the developer would go ahead and build. So we are placing a lot of judgment on deciding perhaps what the inspector did or didn't think. And I think that it's dangerous as well for planning applications for to go back on. We refused it to start with. Okay, it was given approval. I don't think it's relevant for a Section 73 alteration. I think that it would be a new planning application because it is a material change to what's being delivered on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Louise, did you wish to respond to any of the points?
Yes. Firstly, I would like to say that I can understand members' frustrations about this particular application. A large proportion of affordable housing was secured as part of the original scheme. This application has come in. It's frustrating for officers as well. However, I would just like to remind members that they're here to assess the proposal against the development plan and any other material considerations, one of which is the inspector's decision. In relation to the comments about that this shouldn't be decided as part of a Section 73 application, there isn't a statutory definition of minor material amendments. However, there is sort of a working definition that officers and inspectors tend to use, and that is that a minor material amendment is one whose scale and nature results in a development which is substantially different from the one that has been approved. And I would really ask members to hold that in their mind. Is this scheme substantially different from what has been approved? And the second question is, when you assess it against our current planning policies, does it meet the requirements of those policies. And when it comes to affordable housing, unfortunately, in members' newly adopted plan, members have opted to have 30% affordable housing as the requirement, and this amended scheme does meet that 30%. And yeah, as I've said, I completely understand members' frustrations, but that is the plan at which we are assessing this scheme against this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I tend to agree with what our officers are saying in respect of the use of minor material amendment. I don't know that in a court we would be able to stop this on the basis that it's more than minor, so to speak. So, you know, that is a concern. I disagree with Councillor Goodridge completely, of course, because we do have laws which do limit development in Farnham, and at the very pinnacle of planning law we've got habitats and we've got no appropriate assessment. This appeal decision was granted before the Sweetman judgment, so working on a system which in which Natural England and our council and other councils have been basically told by the courts that they are wrong, that they've got to do things differently, and that they have got to assess whether the mitigation being proposed has removed all doubt in respect of whether there'll be an impact on the heath. So, you know, we do have that, but if members aren't going to use it anyway, if members just can't be honest about the idea of we've got to conduct a proper assessment, and we've had 10 years of it, so I can't imagine that people are going to change their ways now. We have no appropriate assessment in terms of what is required by the law and as defined by the Habitats Directive and by case law. So we have got what we need if we want to turn this down. But it seems to me that from the last decision that was made in here, members have no intention of doing so. I will be following the law, as always. I would suggest other members do, because that's what we have. And if people want a good reason to turn this down, it is because the appeal decision was made under different terms other than the Sweetman judgment and was not lawfully assessed. Thank you.
Councillor James.
So, on a point of order, I would like Councillor Hyman not to speak on my behalf, to say that any decision I might make is illegal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
I will just say I don't believe Councillor Hyman said that, but I will just press on to the other point. Your definition of what is distinction between minor and major, your definition had in itself another subjective term in the form of the word significant. So what do you mean if we're saying what's the difference between minor and major, what is significant then, to use your definition?
Yeah, so substantial. Yeah, it is a subjective word. However, substantial is quite a strong word. I think it does need to be quite a big change. In my opinion, that's my interpretation of that, is that it does need to be quite significant, a big change to the scheme. And I think, in my officer's opinion, the scale and nature of the proposal isn't substantially altered by what is before you this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir, you wish to come back.
I'm just going to add a simple thing as a layman. If I can't afford a house, am I going to live in a stinky place? Or am I going to be, I could only afford that? I wouldn't do that. I'm sorry. And whatever happens. I mean, it's an emotional thing which the planner has done. I'm going to speak clearly, that he's made of affordable houses. But affordable houses, we are going to that instinct that we're going to go that low and give a person who can't afford a house and buy a house first time in a stinky place. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. It's so transparent with this application that everything about it is wrong. And I in my heart of hearts, having sat in this chamber for many years, I just really believe this is sending out such a wrong message, and how it can be interpreted, how our interpretation of our rules and policies can be overturned, I think is frightening and sends out a different message. I think the point here is a judgment, and it is a judgment made by members. And in my judgment, this is not a minor material change. It is substantial. And I could not, with my hand on my heart, endorse the officer's recommendation on this particular application, because I do think, and I think it's already been echoed and said before, that changes on this scale and mass should warrant a separate application, and that's what I think we should be looking at, is a separate application. I could not, with all the information before me and with the threats of potential more appeals, and we've had this on Eastern Planning where we've been subjected to emails with threatening undercurrent suggestions of if you don't do this. Well, I don't take an awful lot of notice of that. I'm using my judgment here as an elected member. I've listened to what my fellow councillors have said, and in my opinion, this is wrong, and I'm going to stick by what I say, that it is not minor, it is major, and the only way you can rectify this is through a separate application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Louise, did you wish to address the pong, the odour?
Just to clarify in relation to the odour, there was a quite substantial amount of additional information that was submitted during the course of the appeal, which satisfied the inspector that there would not be an issue in terms of odour. So that issue has in effect gone away through that additional information that has been submitted. If I can also make another comment just in relation to the comments regarding this particular application. I just want to reiterate that we do have to think carefully about whether it is a minor material amendment, and should the committee wish to go down the route of refusing it on the basis of a minor material amendment, then inevitably a new application will be submitted for a planning application in which the same issues would be before you, which it would also be difficult to refuse. So I would just bear that in mind, and to really consider whether the scheme is so substantially different in scale and nature to that which was before the appeal inspector, and also bear in mind that established appeal decisions and case law really allow quite a wide-ranging changes to be made under this process. And this Section 73 process is really, the government introduced it to enable quicker decisions to be made and to stop developments from being delayed and prevented just because of procedural issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one thing, on page 72, it says under the affordable housing, paragraph 3, bottom bit there, that furthermore, the provision of a significant level of affordable housing was put forward as a benefit of considerable weight. So therefore, if it was considered to be considerable weight at that time, it had substantial influence, I would say, and therefore on the decision. So therefore the substantial influence at that time is now being taken away. So it is a substantial change in my judgment. Thank you.
Louise.
So the applicants, when submitting their application, that's how they put forward the additional affordable housing. When they were submitting it to us to look at in terms of the decision that was made, they were putting it forward as a considerable benefit. However, as you can see from the appeal decision, which is appended to the end of the report, the inspector did not give considerable weight to that as a benefit. And it is that appeal decision that is a material consideration that members must give weight to this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm like everybody else, a sense of frustration of this reduction in affordable housing. And I'm tempted to consider going down the route of refusing it. The consequences of that, as Louise has just pointed out, is that we're going to have another planning application come through, which would comply with current council policy, and would also have to reflect, would reflect the terms of the inspector's report. So it gets us to exactly back where we are today. So actually nowhere to go, because even if we did refuse it, we're going to be exactly in the same position when we see the new application. Seems to me pointless going down that particular route. So very reluctantly, and I have to agree with Councillor Story and Councillor Goodridge that we have really, in planning terms, no real avenue to go except what is before us, because whatever happens, it's going to come back in the same form, and we're in exactly the same position all over again. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, any further comments before? Yes, Councillor Wojciechowski.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I take on board what's been said, but please, for my own peace of mind, can officers clarify for me? If a separate application came before us, we would have to judge it on its individual merits, and then members could make a decision whether to agree or disagree. And bearing in mind now that we've got an adopted local plan, would that influence the officer's recommendation? But we can't answer that because we haven't got it. But you know, the whole idea of another application being a non-determining factor in this strikes me as being unreasonable in the sense that we have to accept every application on their individual merit. Thank you, Chairman.
Going on from there, we've also got our own LPP Part 1. Would that have any bearing on it, or the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan? Just asking for your officer's opinion, really.
So at the time of the decision, the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan was adopted, so the inspector considered it against those policies and gave those policies full weight. The decision was issued just shortly after the adoption of Local Plan Part 1, but the inspector's decision doesn't reflect that. It refers to draft policies. However, you will see from his decision that he didn't find any conflict with those draft policies. So at that time, this was following the examination, officers were given substantial weight to the policies in the draft local plan at that time, and that is our view that we put to the inspector, that those policies should attach substantial weight. As you can see, when an inspector finds compliance with policies, it really doesn't matter how much weight he gives to it, because he's finding them in accordance with it, regardless of whether you give limited or full weight. He found that the development was acceptable in relation to those policies. So in answer to your question, no, it wouldn't make any difference. The inspector was very clear that it was in accordance with the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and the local plan, and that he didn't give any additional material benefit to the additional provision of affordable housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, very quickly, Chairman. The one issue that the inspector did appear to get completely wrong was the matter of the presumption in favour of sustainable development not applying to this development, which of course that is now, there is a consultation until this 7th of December by the CLG, by the government, on the changes they intend to make to the NPPF in respect of the Sweetman judgment. And I don't think that we should make a decision on this one in favour of it, because of course the presumption against development applies unless we've got an appropriate assessment. He didn't have at the time, we haven't got at the moment, and therefore we should not be granting consent. We could defer this until after the government clarifies its position, but without an appropriate assessment, the same applies as the last development earlier this evening, we cannot lawfully grant consent to it. That's what the law says, and I go by what the law says, regardless of what other councillors might prefer to think. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you for letting me come back. Just when you're saying this is potentially substantial and therefore shouldn't be a Section 73, one just got to look at page 69 to the two comparison block plans and spot the difference. There are not very many. The only change is the affordable housing. And I don't think that reducing the affordable housing down to our current policy in itself is substantial. And if we got a new planning application, a fresh planning application coming in, the officers would have to put in their report, in my view, great quotes from the appeal decision of the the inspector that determined this matter in 2017, and he even covers the odour position. He's an expert on odour, it would appear, because paragraph 16, he concludes what he thinks about the odour problem. And, you know, we're between a rock and a hard place, and I don't think we can say this is substantially different. But that's my view.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the recommendation? I think we have all have a dilemma here, not of our making, not of the officers' making. But, yes, I'm going to take... Is it all 6 pages I've got to read out? Right, so members, the revised recommendation A is that, subject to the completion of a deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement to secure affordable housing and infrastructure contributions sought under WA 2016-2456 and conditions 2 to 25 as set out in pages 79 to 89 of the agenda report and amended condition 1 set out on this update sheet, permission be granted. All those in favour of that recommendation?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Abstentions?
1.
So that recommendation isn't carried, and we move on. No, we don't move on to recommend. I need a proposal for that recommendation to be refused, and a seconder, please. Councillor Follis to propose, Councillor Coburn to second, and some reasons for the refusal, please. Planning reasons.
That the application has significantly changed in the view of this committee since the previous one, and it should be resubmitted as a full application as opposed to through this mechanism, or something to that effect.
Louise?
Thank you. Based on Councillor Follows' comments just there and the comments that have been heard this evening, and using some of the wording from the definition that I read out, I would recommend the following. The proposed amendment to the proposal is not considered to be a minor material amendment because the reduction in affordable housing would be substantially different in nature to the approved scheme, and as such would not be in accordance with Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990.
Right, so proposed by Councillor Follows, seconded by Councillor Coburn for that planning reason. All those in favour of refusing this application?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Abstentions?
2.
Right. Do we now move on to recommendation B?
I was going to say it doesn't apply.
Well, it doesn't apply, does it? Louis?
Apologies. Yeah, because the legal agreement hasn't been signed, I would also recommend that the reason for refusal 1 on page 90 of the agenda report is added, which is in relation to affordable housing in the absence of a legal agreement. In addition, the second reason for refusal that Gemma read out on her verbal update. And also, I would also recommend that there is a third reason for refusal in relation to the failure to secure the financial contributions towards the SPA. So that would in total be 4 reasons for refusal. The one that I read out in relation to Councillor Follows' proposal, and then the failure to provide the legal agreement in relation to affordable housing, the failure to provide the legal agreement in relation to infrastructure contributions, and the failure to provide the legal agreement in relation to the SPA contributions. And those are all sort of technical reasons for refusal that could be overcome through the submission of an up-to-date legal agreement.
Are members happy to accept those? Agreed? Thank you. I've been told that we don't need to move, we don't have to consider recommendation B. We have no exclusion of press and public, so I will close this meeting and thank you all very much. Safe journey home.